All right, and we are now recording. Welcome everybody to our Counseling Psychology Q&A event for fall of 2024. And we are recording this panel. We'll be posting it to YouTube, and links to this recording can be found on the University of Kentucky Counseling Psychology's Q&A webpage, where y'all originally went to register for today's event. And it has links to all of our past annual Q&A events, where there's a wealth of information that's been shared in that space. We'll go ahead and introduce ourselves as panelists. So my name is Dr. Joseph Hammer. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm an associate professor of counseling psychology at the University of Kentucky and a licensed psychologist in the state of Kentucky. And I'm joined by several counseling psychology graduate students who will introduce themselves. And Melanie, why don't you go next, then popcorn it to Casey and then to Cece.
Hello, everybody. My name is Melanie Miller, she, her. Glad you all are able to be here today. I am a fifth-year doctoral candidate here in the counseling psychology program. Dr. Hammer is my advisor, and I'm always glad to do these sorts of things. So please feel free to ask any questions you have. Casey.
Hello, everyone. So glad y'all could make it to this. My name is Casey Vigil. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a fourth year PhD candidate in counseling psychology, and Dr. Hammer is now also my advisor. So nice to meet y'all.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cece. I use she, her pronouns as well. And I am Dr. Hammer's second year PhD student. I came in post-bac, which means that I graduated with my undergrad degree and then came straight into the PhD program.
Yes, so collectively, a lot of us have experience with different stages of undergraduate and graduate training at the master's and the doctoral level, and for me as in a professor role with the specialty of counseling psychology. I'm going to go ahead and share a few slides to orient us. So just going to show you this here, this out of the way. So we talked about that. Quick plug up front. My website, drjosephhammer.com, has a host of resources about psychology graduate school, including how to get in and how to thrive in that environment. And you can take the mental health career professions test, which has been taken by over 90,000 people to help them explore different mental health occupations that might be a good fit for them. And we all are at the University of Kentucky associated with the counseling psych program. We have a PhD program and a doctoral preparation focused master's program. And so the due date for the PhD program is December 1, coming right up here. And then it's February 1 for the 2-year master's program. So that's a quick plug on that. And so how are we going to run this thing? So y'all have a Zoom chat. And so what you can all do is at this point, you can start to type your questions into the Zoom chat, and we'll just go down the list and we'll get through as many questions as we can. Usually we're able to get through all the questions that people have by the end of the hour. And so you can go ahead and pop those questions into the chat. Now, if you have a question that's too tricky to type out and it would be better to ask verbally, you can instead type into the chat. I have a verbal question about, and then let us know what the general topic is. And then at that, we may then call on you to come off mute and share your response, share your question, and then we can address it. Other kind of logistical things to know is that the 4 of us as panelists will share the space and try to offer complementary perspectives on things. And it's okay that if some questions will be more easily answered by certain folks than others, but we're looking to share the space and crowdsource our knowledge. And I do recommend that concise and factual questions, in our experience, tend to work best for this Q&A, whereas super nuanced, specific questions that are really specific to your unique circumstance and may be less likely to kind of extend to other people's experience, those can always be asked of me personally, and I'm happy to get back to you through that webpage that's there. But concise, factual questions generally are best, and we've never had a problem with that. Also, a shout out that when we did our 2021 Q&A panel, the approach we did for that is we had prepared slides and went real quick and efficiently through answering some of the most common questions that people have about counseling, psychology, and related professions and doctoral training. So all these questions here you see on the screen were answered in our 2021 Q&A panel. And so that QR code up on the screen will bring you to that, the recording of that panel. And so if you haven't seen that, that's one I recommend everybody watch because it's just a great solid primer for things that folks will want to know about the key classic questions that people have. And so that can be a nice complement to the questions that we'll end up answering today. And so I think that is it that I need to show in terms of slides. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point. And we are now ready for your questions, and I'm checking the meeting chat settings here. And so right now it says that participant can chat with everyone and anyone directly. So hopefully you all should be able to type your questions into the chat, and us panelists are ready for your questions. So open up that Zoom chat. And again, you can find the Zoom chat along the bottom bar of your Zoom window. There will be an icon that says chat, usually has some comment bubbles there. And if you don't see it, you can click on the button that has circles and three dots that says more, and you'll be able to find the chat option from the drop-down menu there. And that will pull up the Zoom chat, and you should be able to paste your chat, use the chat to ask your questions. And so I will keep an eye on chat and ready for those questions. Camilla Smith-Donald asks, how does taking a gap year after undergrad affect the application process and experience in the PhD and master's program? I'll invite the students to share first.
Well, I'll start. Realizing in this moment, I don't know what y'all have done, so we'll find out together. But hello again, my name is Melanie. So I actually took 3 gap years off between my undergrad and then coming back as a post-bac, which means I came in as a PhD student, but I did my master's here before completing my PhD coursework. I find, and it varies, but if you have taken a gap year off and you're still really sure that this is the career path for you, I found a lot of comfort and grounding in that I don't know that everyone else experience when people go straight through. I don't know because I only know my experience, but I am personally really glad I did that because it made me more competitive given what I did in those years off. So I think a lot of the question of is a gap year a good choice for me or not is what you're going to do in that gap year. And if you are planning on reapplying to programs, making sure that it's something that's going to help you become more competitive, which there's a lot of nuance in how one might do that. But for me, at least, I went into some nonprofit work and found my way back into research and evaluation. It was very sure that this is the career path for me, and I would not have done it another way. I think I was way more competitive when I came back after a couple of gap years. And so I had a bigger choice in where I ended up. And so I could prioritize fit rather than just trying to get in the first place that I was able to.
I also took 2 gap years before applying to my PhD program here at UK. I worked as a research project coordinator with a professor at NYU Abu Dhabi. And what that helped me find was that because in undergrad, I majored in literature and creative writing, I wanted to gain more research experience beyond in psychology beyond senior year to really determine that a PhD would be a suitable like commitment for me because it's 5 to 6 years if you're coming in with just an undergrad degree because you're getting your master's degree along the way. And I think that like year and a half of doing, research and working on a research project with a team really helped me solidify my passion for research and my, like, I guess I was more sure that I didn't just want to become a licensed mental health therapist, but rather incorporate research as a part of my whole journey and become a licensed counseling psychologist. So that just really helped me identify my goals and what I was comfortable undertaking. I also think that it puts you in a different mindset when you take a like couple years or even just a year after finishing your undergrad degree before jumping into grad school. I personally found myself like being able to be more responsible for my finances, for my time, and just like have better control over my personal life. So I think it's really helped me prep for this whole PhD journey.
Yeah, so to offer a perspective from the other side, I did not take a gap year. And looking back, I now wish that I had at least taken one. Not only like what Cece and Melanie said, to develop more experience, but also to take care of my own wellness before jumping into a commitment like a PhD. Um, and also, yeah, definitely, sorry, brain went blank there.
Yeah. Thank you all for sharing. I think I would upvote everything that the students have shared. As far as faculty go, our perspective on this is that we want to take the people who are the most qualified and have the best fit. And so if you, by taking gap years, will help you become more qualified, take a gap year and think about the big buckets of experience in which you can gain to become a more competitive applicant. And typically, the number one thing, particularly for PhD programs, is additional research experience. So, how can you, even if it's on a voluntary basis, be involved in a research team or a research lab to gain additional research experience or do independent study that will help build your research skills? How can you do paraprofessional or clinical or helping or community engaged or volunteerism or community service, or how can you do applied helping things that can boost that aspect of your CV and ideally help you be able to bring in a letter of recommendation from someone who can speak to your ability to be a good, warm, empathetic human being who's in a good position to be a good future mental health professional. And for those of y'all who are wanting to further develop your critical consciousness, meaning your ability to think critically about how cultural identity and systems of power and oppression influence mental health and how we relate to each other and opportunities and challenges that we have. If you're looking to build your critical consciousness, there are a lot of activism and social justice organizations that you can get involved with, such as Showing Up for Racial Justice or Working Families Party, where you can further develop those skills and improve that aspect of your CV and your readiness to be a structurally responsive mental health care professional when you join graduate school. And see some other questions in the chat, which is great. I am also pasting into the chat a note here that if you prefer, for privacy reasons, to ask a question anonymously to the panelists, that's completely great. You can just direct message me and I will just share the question verbally in the space for the panelists and I won't identify you. I see someone's already taken me up on that offer, which is wonderful. Okay, let's see the next question. What were experiences in your undergrad that were most helpful in preparing you for post-grad? Again, I defer to the students.
I can get us started. I think specific to counseling psychology, I was a peer counselor for throughout my undergrad. So that helped me feel really prepared for doing like classes in psychology or in counseling, as well as like going into my practicum site and actually working with clients. It just feels like a natural extension of the work that I was doing in undergrad. And I also want to say, like, on the other side of things, just academically and just managing your life, like I scheduled out my life to a T on Google Calendar, even in undergrad. And those like time management skills really, really helped me as a PhD student when there's a lot going on and you're wearing all these different hats. So I definitely say like time management as well as having experience with like clinical stuff. And of course, I think research, but like research is kind of a almost like a given when you're applying to PhD programs, but having the research experience really helped as well.
Yeah, to go off of what Cece said, definitely research is going to be a big one. If you can get involved while you're in undergrad, depending on the size of your college. I know I went to a small college, and so there were more opportunities for me to get involved in research because there were less people interested in it. But obviously, it depends based on where you're at. And if you don't have access to that, that's totally fine as well. I mean, definitely look for other experiences where you can volunteer. So I also volunteered in the community for like AIDS testing and HIV prevention, as well as volunteering on campus to increase like literacy about sexual health. And even though they weren't directly related to counseling or research, I still lean on those experiences when I'm thinking about research questions or like even community-wide issues that would impact my work.
I underline all of that. Some of the other things that come to mind for me that were really helpful, and it's going to be so personal on what will be helpful for you. I found it really helpful to attend conferences, partially because it gave me a real life experience of what it means to be in academia. And also, it helped me meet a lot of people. So I was able to get a lot of different insight on different paths in this career. One of the things I found most overwhelming was just how many paths there are to doing kind of similar things on the other side. So, clinical versus counseling, versus social work versus MFT. There's just so many different pieces. So, the conference attendance was really helpful to me. And the other thing I would really recommend for everyone, especially if you're thinking about becoming a therapist of any sort, is to go to therapy yourself. It is something that I found really helpful that I did in undergraduate, and really, I still find myself leaning back on some of those experiences of how I felt doing that and how I want to make people feel now. So just to add those two, but really good question.
Yeah, thank you all for that. The next question was, does the master's program lead more directly into the path of clinical work, and what generally do the PhD and master's programs differ in their future pathway? And so this is a question that could be answered at the general level, like nationally, what does that tend to look like? And then that could be answered specific to our program, because this webinar is about our specialty of counseling psychology, and our focus is national. We'll start there, and we can very briefly talk about our programs. And so generally, does the master's program lead more directly into the path of clinical work? It depends on what flavor of master's program you're talking about. There are a number of mental health professions. Psychology is just one. You also have social work, counseling, and marriage and family therapy, and also pastoral counseling, and then depending on how you categorize it, psychiatry, which is in medicine. So you can go into the mental health professions through any of these professions. Many of these professions are master's level centric. They tend to prioritize the master's degree as the terminal degree, the typical final degree you get to go on and practice. So if you get a 3-year master's degree in counseling or clinical social work or marriage and family therapy, that tends to then lead to your ability to get licensed at the master's level. And that's the focus on providing direct services to people at that level. In psychology, it's more complicated, where you have both health service psychology flavors of psychology, specialties, which would be primarily counseling psychology, clinical psychology, and school psychology. And so those specialties prepare people to potentially be able to be licensed. And technically, I guess, industrial organizational psychology sometimes can get licensed. It's complicated. But then you have other specialties within psychology, like cognitive psychology or developmental psychology or personality psychology or neuroscience psychology, where they may not lead to licensure and talk therapy. And so depending on what flavor of program you're talking about, that may or may not lead more directly into doctoral level work or into clinical work. In general, if you're hoping one question is, do you need the doctorate to do what you want to do? And if so, are you qualified enough to go directly into a doctorate, or do you need to either get post-bac experience, or would it be smart to do a master's program? There's a set of related questions and a lot of complexity related to all of this. The 2021 counseling site Q&A video that I mentioned earlier in this recording is a great place for the fuller context of that. So I'll stop myself here before providing that kind of fuller context. And briefly, I'll say that for our particular master's program, it's a 2-year program, 48 credit hour. It is specifically designed only and specifically for people who do want to get into a PsyD or a PhD in counseling psychology or clinical psychology, but their CV is not quite strong enough, their resume is not quite strong enough to be competitive for those programs. They need a little bit more time and nurturance, the opportunity to get involved in research labs, learn the hidden curriculum and the unspoken rules of academia and getting into a doctoral program, those sorts of things. So for students, our master's program is a good fit for students who want to take that next step, but they need some more time to cultivate their skills and interests. There are some other master's programs across the country, depending on which state you're in, where you may be able to get a 3-year master's degree in, say, counseling psychology. And in certain states, you might be able to go get licensed as a counselor, but that's a bigger story for another time. So I'll stop myself there. Students, was there anything essential you all wanted to chip in before transitioning to the next question?
The only thing that I would add just to the second part of the question of what do PhDs, what can they have like different career outcomes for? And so one of the biggest differences that I have found so far, and please, Dr. Hammer, fill in any of my gaps here, is if you have interest in research, if you have interest in any sort of like grant participation, program evaluation, if you're wanting to have a bigger impact on the systemic side of things, I have found that it is often helpful to get that doctorate level. At least that's what I'm seeing thus far, because you have a stronger transferable skill set. It also tends to make us a little more competitive. And to be very blunt about it, insurance will pay you more to do very similar work. And so I do also just want to name that there are a lot of system level implications that the doctorate will help you be advance more quickly with.
Yeah, thank you for catching that last piece of the question. Yeah, very good. Yeah, and we can, if we have time, we can certainly talk more to PhD versus master's pro and con, stuff like that. How long does it generally take students to finish the PhD program? I just did a survey of all the counseling psychology programs across the country because I'm a director of our program, and so I know all the other directors. And I asked them all to do a survey to tell me the answer to this question, as well as a bunch of other answers to a bunch of related questions. And so it is common for PhD programs to take about 5 to 7 years total. It depends on the program, depends if you did a terminal standalone master's first or not. It depends if you started at one institution for your master's and switched to another and how efficiently credits transferred and you were able to waive courses. But 5 to 7 is typical for PhD, and for PsyD, I would say 4 to 6 for a PsyD program. And PhD and PsyD are two different flavors of counseling and clinical psych doctorates. PsyD is very practice focused. PhD is generally a mix of research, science, and practice focus. Yeah. What advice would you give to someone just starting on the path towards a career in counseling psychology? What do you wish you would have known when you started? Great question. I'll toss that to the students.
All right. Okay. Zoom is fun, isn't it? So there's so much advice and there's so much that I wish I wouldn't have known. But if I'm gonna summarize it, I would try to find a mentor. And even if that's in the form of a graduate student right now, that's another thing that I'm actually really glad I did in my undergrad, circling back to that, is getting to know graduate students who work currently in those programs or similar programs. I wish I would have known that earlier in my time because graduate students will tell you the truth and they will also have more recent insight into some of like what it means to balance your life in different areas. So I wish I would have known to talk to people a little bit more, the importance of networking for it. And I'm also a first generation college student. So a lot of I don't know what I don't know. And the best resource I've found repeatedly is mentorship and through my peers. So I've really leaned into my cohort, to the people that I'm in this program with, to my mentor here. And so don't be scared to ask questions. It is better to ask questions than it is to assume you know and then be wrong. Um, so yeah, kind of broad, but talk to people.
Yeah, I absolutely underscore what Melanie just said. I'm also a first gen college student. And so, like, the idea of trying to navigate even applying to graduate school was very daunting. And so, definitely develop like a good mentorship, either, like Melanie said, with a graduate student or with a professor. I know for me, my experience was like I worked with somebody who had just finished her PhD. And so it was all very fresh on her mind, which was very helpful. And I think specific to like pursuing a career in counseling psychology, I wish that like when I was applying to graduate school, I got really clear on whether my career would best be housed within clinical psychology or counseling psychology. I started in clinical psychology, and when I actually applied from my master's to PhD, I realized my career would be better suited for counseling psychology. So definitely do your research there. Because yeah, two very different flavors.
I'm just gonna echo everything that Melanie and Casey said. I think they pretty much hit the nail on the head with their answers. Yeah, so I'm gonna keep mine short. Just that.
And what I would say is that it is so common to think you have to do A, B, C, and D, but a lot of times you only have to do C, D, and E. It's just the more you can talk with people who seem to know what they're talking about, the more you can learn, oh, I don't have to invest in this, and I can instead focus my limited bandwidth on this. It's just we're stretched so thin generally. And so the efficiency and intentionality with where you pour your time is essential. And you only know that by self-educating, asking mentors, that sort of thing, because it's just so easy to sink time into things that will not bear fruit directly. And so it's worth it to be in constant communication with mentors and online resources that can help guide you with that. And this next question is, have any of your peers or yourselves been adult learners? For example, undergraduate in their 30s and pursuant of a master's.
So I'm not, and no one in my cohort or people who have been close to my cohort have been. So I will name that and give you that context. I also know that that is something that seems to just be like a bit of an anomaly right now in our program. It has not always been that way. And I'm thinking of my own personal mentor, especially when I was an undergrad, who was 35 when she started her PhD and had two babies along the way. And so it was really, really meaningful for me to have mentorship from her, particularly because I think I learned a lot watching, and I also just want to name that is not my experience. So I imagine that, especially if that was a position that you were in, it would be even more important to get connected to the community here pretty quickly, whether it's here or anywhere that you land. because the network and community around that support is available. People do it, and it is the more rare exception to the path. I am just going to name that. I'm not going to lie to you. There's not a ton of people who take that path, but it's not that it's not possible. It is something I have personally witnessed, and it looks different. It looks different, especially to Dr. Hammer's earlier point of where you put your energy. It has to be a different level of intentional when you have other things going on. What I do have experience with is I am a little bit older than the rest of my cohort. I'm turning 32 very soon. I feel that. And I felt it more when I came in with my master's. I felt like I was just in a different life stage than a lot of the people I came in with. And it does make a difference, especially in terms of community building, but I'm really glad that I was intentional to throw myself into it anyway, and it has definitely been the right approach. So I'm done.
Just because the question asks, have any of your peers or yourselves been adult learners? I will say that in my cohort, we are now second year master students, but then I'm on the PhD track. We did have a couple people in their 30s, I think, or a bit older. So there was that. And obviously I mean, I can't speak for their experience, but like I don't know that there was necessarily that difference that we felt in terms of like learning, like getting having that learning experience as a part of that cohort. But I also can't speak for their experience. I just wanted to put it out there that there are different age groups within the cohort.
Yeah, and I will say that when I think about the next question that usually comes after the question that was posed, is that here are some of the key things to think about if you're an adult learner or thinking about being an adult learner who'd be entering later. One is that you have greater life experience in context that is extremely valuable and attractive to programs because one of the things that we value in bringing in students is we want people who have a strong ability to self-regulate, self-manage, multitask, balance the things. And a lot of times adult learners and people who've been out in the working world have had a chance to develop those competencies. And so it can be really wonderful to work with someone who has that experience. The tricky things about potentially being an adult learner is that depending on how much of a difference in age you are from the people who would be in your cohort, you may feel closer or farther away in terms of cultural similarity because age cohorts and generations vary in terms of how they connect interpersonally, in terms of what they find funny, in terms of how they like to spend time together. And so that can be depending on where you're at and the typical age band of the people you'd be connecting with. It may be easier or harder to develop some of these colleagueships into friendships. And depending on your own needs, you may or may not need them to be friends. As long as we're all kind to each other and good colleagues, maybe that's fine. But in terms of feeling a sense of connection with people in your cohort, that is something to consider, where generational differences can influence how easy it feels to connect with people interpersonally around that. The other thing is scheduling. Graduate programs are really busy. A lot of times there are heavy structural constraints that are put on the faculty from different directions in terms of when can we find the time to have this class or do this prac or make time for this assistantship. And so it can be very difficult in terms of finding flexibility with scheduling because there are so many things to do and limits on when those things can be done that if you're like, I need to make sure I'm home at 5 o'clock or home at 3 o'clock to pick my kid up from school or whatever, like when you have these other obligations that come sometimes with being an adult learner, that can create trickiness because you really want to know, hey, when are your classes taught? Are they ever taught during the day? Are they ever taught in the evening? you want to know the schedulingness of all these things to know, will that be possible given your other responsibilities and potential parenting or caregiving for older folks, that sort of thing. Um, yeah. Um, Next question is, how do you stick out to gain research experience? I feel like there are few labs hiring, or they prioritize those who already have research experience under their belt. What do we think, y'all?
I can speak to this because I had to fight for my undergrad research position, and it was a battle. I went to a pretty small undergrad, and it was a research institution, so there were a lot of students doing research. And I had a background, like I said, in literature and creative writing, so I had no research experience prior to senior year. And in my junior year, where I took a gap semester, that was when I was like, okay, I have been working as a peer counselor. I know that I want to pursue a counseling psychology degree, and I think I want to do a PhD, but I need to figure out whether I want to do research or not. So there was that big dilemma. And I applied for a research position when I came back for senior year, and I didn't get it the first semester. And I thought that was the end of my research career. I was like, I can never do a PhD. I didn't get this research experience. And I was like in my little dark thought spiral. And then I thought about like the other jobs I'd applied to in the past. And, you kind of have to treat it like a job application. You'll have to apply until you get something. So what I did, because there were not even a lot of labs hiring at that point, I reached out to the professor and I asked her like point blank, I was like, what was it that I could do better in my, I guess like in my previous, or what was it that would strengthen my application for the next time round? Because I know that I don't have previous research experience, but I'm super passionate about what you're doing, which is about women in the workplace. And also I can promise that I'm a fast learner. I've been taking all these stats classes and psych classes, so I have the drive for it. And then she was honestly like, oh, the person that you are interviewing against was just, she had 3 years of research experience, and our lab really needed that. But if you'd like, I can include you from like the summer period where you be working more on a volunteer basis, but you gain that research experience so that you can reapply in the spring semester. So then, like, I think really reaching out to people one-on-one really opened doors for me. And that was how I got my foot in the door, and got that initial experience that I needed in order to keep building up on that. And then, so I think it's a matter, I mean, for me, it was a matter of like reaching out personally and building that rapport in like a setting where my name wouldn't have been known otherwise. And yeah, I think that was just kind of how I started building my research, just career, basically. I don't know if Melanie or Casey, you guys had other ways of getting into research when you didn't have prior experience.
Yeah, so definitely underscore what Cece said. Definitely build those one-on-one relationships. I also in my undergrad I did volunteer work for a lab. It wasn't a paid position. So that was one thing that was difficult, was like juggling that on top of funding school. Um, However, like I reached out to somebody who was doing research that was more specific to what I'm interested in now, which is sex and sexuality. And she wasn't taking students at the time, but she knew somebody who was looking for undergrad researchers. So I would also say, like, be open to whatever topic you would be studying, like whatever focus you would have in your first research experience, because you never know. Like, I ended up studying anxiety, and now it's part of what I love to do. So yeah, definitely reach out to folks in your program and see if there are opportunities that they know about.
Not too much to add other than, y'all, when I tell you how much of it is networking, so much of it is networking. And that's where I benefited personally from going to conferences as an undergrad that I probably had no business going to. And I went to it just shamelessly to introduce myself and chit chat with people. And I find that that has worked for me pretty consistently since then. People who actually have a personal connection to that lab or to that work tend to stand out given they already know that name. Not to say you have to do that at all. And I know it was one of the things that I continue to be very frustrated about in academia broadly. And I think the workforce broadly is so much of it is networking. So make sure you have a LinkedIn, make sure you have your resume that's ready to go, use your resources, go to the Career Center at your undergraduate institution, treat it like you would treat a job. And don't underestimate how much of it is personal fit as well. So be as warm and engaging, as curious as possible. And if you and when you do get rejected to something, we all will. I really like the point that I think CC made earlier of asking, what can I do to become more competitive? And then come back. People notice that sincerity and interest stands out. So if someone submits, doesn't get it, still continues the conversation, then comes back again, you're going to stand out for that. So yeah, network, y'all.
Can I add one other thing? As Melanie was talking, I was thinking about something. So yes, absolutely. Conferences as an undergrad is so helpful. And I think I had mentioned this, but I might be repeating myself. But so I did end up going into a master's program specifically to get more research experience because I knew I wanted to go like a research intense route. And so I definitely recommend looking into that if you're having a harder time getting research experience now. That one-on-one mentoring I got during my master's for like how do you actually do research from start to finish was probably the most valuable experience I got.
Sorry, I'll have like one last tiny little thing. I think it's also important to just be open to different research experiences. Your first research lab experience might not be one that you are dying to do. Like I told the professor that I was really passionate about her research and she did psychology of women in the workplace. I like that topic. I believe in the research. My research right now completely different, but what that did for me was to give me the skills to use SPSS to work with the research team to build my knowledge just around research and working in labs in general that I could use and take and use for other labs that I really wanted to join later on. So I just say like whatever opportunity you come across, like if it's like in psychology, like be open to it, don't turn it down right away. And there are lots of labs now hiring like online research assistants, so don't discount those either. I would say keep your eye open, look at like different professors' websites, and just try to see if they're like offering any positions for undergrad RAs.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent, excellent advice. It's 1:45, so we're on pace. This is good. And in a second, I'll paste a blurb into the chat with links to various resources. And I will say that us here in the Hammer Lab, we will accept applications for people who are at a distance and want to work in our research lab over the internet. That works well for how we approach our work. So I'll include a link to that as well. So I had a direct message that asked, what careers can you pursue with just the master's? What additional doors does a PhD open up? We touched on this a little bit with some of the prior questions. I think that if it is a master's in counseling psychology or clinical psychology, one thing that people do with that is that it helps them springboard into a doctorate. But if that's not what you want to do, certainly a master's can give you helpful skills that will help you land relevant jobs in higher education or in community health or social service agencies. But only in certain states is it true that a master's in counseling psychology or clinical psychology, and it would have to be a 3-year master's rather than a 2-year master's. Only in some states can you get a master's degree in psychology and then go over to the counselors, which is a different profession, and say, hey, I had a lot of the coursework that you all get in your counselor master's program, can I become licensed as a counselor? If you ever heard like licensed professional clinical counselor, LPCC. In some states, that is possible to do. In other states like Kentucky, for reasons I won't bore you with, the counselors say, no, if you have a psychology degree, you cannot become licensed as a counselor. And these are known as KCREP only states. KCREP is one of the major accrediting bodies for counseling master's programs. And so that's just a whole thing that we don't have time to get into the details of, but it's something to know about. And yeah, we talked a little bit about the additional doors that a PhD opens up. The PhD gives maximum flexibility, maximum prestige, maximum income, but it takes more time to get one. And as terms of a PhD, PhDs are hard to get in. The average person has a 9% chance of getting into a PhD program, which is why people are advised to apply to 10 to 12 PhD programs. So statistically, the odds are better in your favor. And that's not always realistic for geographic or financial reasons, et cetera, but that's part of the game with PhDs. With PsyDs, the downside is that you have to pay out of pocket generally for PsyD programs, but they are a tiny bit shorter, but they are focused on practice, and they do tend to have larger cohort sizes. So there's a pros and cons to every single option, but that's just a little bit of that. Students, anything to add around this before we go to the next?
The only really quick thing I was add is if you do think you want to even keep the door option for a PhD and you do a master's first, ask about research opportunities because they don't all have research opportunities. I would guess that the majority of them are pretty clinically focused. So if you want to keep that door open, that's a question you want to ask is about research opportunities in the master's. They are not a given.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add, so I did my master's in North Carolina, which is one of the few states that you can get licensed at the master's level. So I would, if you're really interested in specifically practicing as a psychologist, I think it's a licensed psychological associate. Usually in that regard, you would be doing like a lot of psychological assessments. I would definitely recommend looking into the specific states where that's allowed, but it's very few and far between, and there would be a lot less flexibility in where you could live.
Yeah, there's only about 10 states that have some sort of master's level psychology licensure credential, like in Kentucky, as Casey was mentioning, the licensed psychological associate, which after 2 years of independent practice, used to be 5, now it's 2, thankfully. After 2 years of practice under supervision, then you can become independent and switch from an LPA into an LPP, licensed psychological practitioner. But the language is different state to state. The American Psychological Association is now starting to accredit certain master's programs in counseling and clinical and school psychology. And there's movement with the Association of Licensure Boards in Psychology nationally to try to create standardized legislation for states to adopt around starting to get more into the game of licensing at the master's level, but that's still in flux. And it's still the Wild West out there with that. Okay, 1:51 Eastern. What are some key factors that admissions committees look for in applicants beyond GPA, GRE, and what types of research experience are most appealing? So key factors admissions committees look for, and then what types of research experiences are most appealing. Should I start and then take it to you? Okay. We want people, like I mentioned earlier, who are going to function as adults, who can self-regulate, manage their time, communicate proactively, just good, strong, being able to manage yourself and your time. That is one of the most valuable things because we as faculty members are stretched thin, just like graduate students are stretched thin. And so we have a lot of mouths to feed, so to speak. We're responsible for the well-being of a lot of people. And so it is helpful when we can meet everybody's needs because everybody's kind of doing their part in showing up in a way that everybody's needs can be taken care of. And sometimes, a student will be in a really rough spot and they need extra care and attention, and that is our job as professors to help with that. But if too many of our students, that's happening at once, then we end up neglecting other students because we have nothing left in the tank. And so that ability to be an adult and manage yourself is the most important thing. The second most important thing is that you have some interpersonal and some cultural awareness, that you know how you make the people around you feel, or you're growing into your knowledge of that awareness, because we want to bring in people who will help create a positive, teamwork focused, non-competitive, support each other, pay it forward culture. We want to bring in people who will help continue to facilitate that warmth and that vibe in our programs. And so your ability to help lift up the people around you, to be aware of how you come across, to apologize when you make inevitable mistakes, to practice appropriate humility, to balance taking up too much space in the room versus not enough space, all of these things interpersonally, including your own cultural awareness of communicating within and across differences, and doing so in a humble way, in a way that you seek to minimize the chances that you say something that hurts somebody else or do something out of ignorance, and a willingness to apologize and repair inevitably when we do that occasionally. All of those things are really important beyond what's on your CV. And so a lot of these things, we look for evidence in your letters of rec. We look for evidence on interview, particularly, especially if in group interview settings, we watch very carefully how the people interact with each other, with fellow applicants and with students. And if they do like a Thursday night social the day before the interview day, we ask our grad students to let us know, hey, how did people come across? What were they like in that space? Because we want to make sure people will be good community members of the community. What else, students, comes to mind?
Just because the question also, I think, specified the research experience part in addition to all the other parts that are attractive. Some of the things I tell people who are applying to PhD programs is look at who you're specifically applying to and try to make sure your transferable skills are pulled out in a way that's easy to find. So if you've done all qualitative research and you're applying to a purely quantitative research lab, you might want to stress things that are more broad transferable skills in research and then talk about any methodology training you've had. And the vice versa might also be true. So look at the type of research that professor is doing and try to make sure you're pulling out the pieces of your experience that are most relevant, especially in that cover letter in the beginning, or if they have a research question, that sort of thing. Because if you get an interview, they mean on paper you are good enough to do that work. They think you're able to do that work. It is much more about fit at that point. So making sure that you are pulling out the details that argue your fit for that particular professor and that particular program can be really helpful.
All right, 1:56, and we have one question left, so our timing was perfect. Do you have advice regarding fellowships or assistantships experience? How did you find the balance in your time? So I'll let you all handle that for the next 2-ish minutes, and then we'll wrap and say goodbye.
It is hard. It is hard. Anyone who tells you different, you should be suspicious of. And it is hard. It is going to be hard. I take it of a framing of while I am in grad school, I see this as I'm treating it like a job, just like I would if I was in the field working my way up for 5, 7 years. I'm trying to see it in that same framework. So get yourself a very detailed calendar, whatever works for you. Be attuned to what works for you and what doesn't. Make sure you have boundaries and get comfortable saying no to things. That is something I am fully hypocrisy of, something I've grown in a lot. I've had good mentorship around. you will have more opportunities than you can do. You can do anything, you cannot do everything. And so get yourself a really good calendar, practice those boundaries, and just know going in, you are going to be very busy. You are going to be busy.
Yeah, I second all of that. I also have a hard time saying no to things. And it's something that you have to get comfortable with when you're like going through a PhD program. Um, One of my most recent assistantship supervisors stressed me over and over again, you are a student first, and that's the whole reason that you're doing this job with me. So where you can, obviously there's not always flexibility in who you work with, but where you can, try to find supervisors like that understand you're a student first.
I would just add on to that. I think if you're coming in as because you'll be coming in as a first year student, the jobs that you're looking at, it's very likely that other students have had that position before. So like talk to students who had been in that assistantship or, that same fellowship before and like ask them about their experience because they're going to have insider tips and tricks that'll help you navigate that process. So that's been really helpful for me in navigating my current assistantship and like setting boundaries and such. And I think I've been having just a really good experience, but I fully credit that to like advanced doctoral students who've been in my position before and have told me what to do and what not to do. So I think that's been really, really helpful talking to people.
I also just want to share a piece of advice that Dr. Hammer, I don't even know if you remember this. You told me this the first day I was physically in Kentucky. You told me I need to learn what to read, what to skim, and what to skip. And a lot of people who come into these programs have been top tier, most competitive their entire life in every space they're in. And you do not need to get the 100 in everything. You just need to get the A, or really, you need to pass. And so, yeah, right. And so trying to make sure that I did not actually have to be the rock star at my assistantship. I could just do my job and not, everything else, that sort of thing, and prioritizing what you're actually there for. So I just want to share that. I tell everyone that specific thing that you told me my very first day, and I say it to myself regularly. So.
Cool. Well, panelists, thank you so much for your sharing your wisdom and your time in this space. Attendees, thank you for being here. I pasted in the chat links to some of my resources, including the newer one, which is my social justice activism internship, which I run completely separately from my day job at University of Kentucky. But I'm really excited about it. It's been a good experience so far. So please check out those resources. If you're looking to get into a doctoral program, think about our program, think about our master's program as a step into a doctoral program. Thank you all for being here. I'll stop the recording and end the meeting and hope to see some applications from some of you. Bye, everybody.